right. Okay, guys, welcome to today's episode of EmpowHERing Coffee Convos. I'm Jessi, the founder of and Chief Empowerment Officer of This Way to Fabulous. And today I am here with Sarah, who's the creator of the Socially Misguided podcast. Okay. She's on a mission to create conversations around toxic society norms. Okay. So you guys know how I feel about society and how much I hate its hold over us, right? And like we make decisions and we just want to live our lives, right? So this conversation is going to be super juicy. I just know it. So before we start, Sarah, why don't you tell everybody just like a little bit about yourself, maybe a quick synopsis about your like your life story, and then kind of like where you're at in life right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. This is super fun. I'm Sarah. I am a fashion designer turned stay-at-home mom, turned podcaster. A quick rundown on me. I moved from Colorado to California after I graduated high school to get my degree in design. Met my husband out there. He was acting. I was going to school. So we lived out there, did our thing, moved back to Texas, where both of us have a ton of family, and started a family. So, I mean, that was like ages ago at this point. So now, I think earlier this year, we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We've got 2 kids and we're in Houston. So yeah.
That's awesome. That's super, super awesome. And then you started a podcast, right? How long ago did you start your podcast?
I started earlier this year, in April. So still kind of newish.
Yeah, for sure. So for backstory for you guys, Sarah and I actually met in 𝐂𝐿𝐍𝐍𝐄𝐂𝐓's pod squad. We were both part of the January pod squad where 𝐂𝐿𝐍𝐶 really just kind of like drilled into us that like now is the time, no matter how messy it is, right? Like
Yes.
Now's the time, just jump in, get started and figure it out along the way. And so I think both of us are kind of in that, new-ish phase of this is kind of what we're doing. Come along with us. This is not like us knowing everything. This is kind of us figuring it out as we go and enjoying you guys, like letting you guys come on the ride with us, right?
Definitely.
So I'm super excited you're here, but like, let's just dive right in. Okay. I want to talk about your podcast for a minute. Okay. You guys, it's something you absolutely have to check out. It's super powerful. I will link it in the show notes for you guys so that you guys have like easy access to that. Okay. But Sarah, first, like your podcast is amazing, but I want to know a little bit more about how you got here. Okay. So like, why a podcast? Why now? What kind of like gave you that fire to, besides 𝐂𝐿𝐍𝐶? Besides 𝐂𝐿𝐍𝐶,
It was a big fire.
Really, yeah, right. She gets a lot of credit for me too.
Yeah.
Besides that, what was your driving factor in bringing this podcast idea to life?
Yeah, so it was kind of 2 very different things. So first of all, selfishly, I really needed something for me. Jessi, I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but I was kind of at that point where I felt very lost in motherhood. Like I had lost who I was outside of being a mom.
Absolutely.
That spark and like what was important to me, and just kind of having a voice outside of things that had to do with my kids. So that was one part of it. And then the other part of it was, do you ever feel like you're just looking around and like, is this real life? Right? Like we're looking around and everything from, racism still runs rampant in our society. We idolize celebrities that talk about being on the verge of starvation to fit into vintage gowns because women are idolized for being beautiful rather than anything else,
Not
they have to offer
names,
the world.
right? Not naming names.
Just go check out my podcast. I may have name dropped a couple people. I couldn't help myself, but on here I won't. But it just like got to a point where I was like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on that I think is super harmful, that I think that we either just don't realize, or it's just easier to just kind of go with the flow or whatever. So instead of complaining about it, I felt like I needed to maybe be part of like the solution for, people that I have influence over, in my life, also to set an example for my kids and hopefully maybe set things on a better trajectory just in general.
Yeah, for sure. And I love how you said something about like, just, it's easier to just, Like it's just easier, and everybody's so about what's easier. And unfortunately, what happens when things are easier is we don't grow, we actually fall backwards. And I know for a fact that there are a lot of people that are listening to this that are like nodding their heads being like, yes, I totally feel this way, because I don't know a single mom who didn't lose herself at some point in her journey, right? Whether it
Right.
was right away, whether it was later on. For me personally, it was pretty much right away. I definitely had a pretty bad episode of postpartum depression. A lot of things were changing in my life. I was getting divorced around the time he was turning 1. My business basically, like, I shut my entire business down. I had no idea who I was, what I was doing, what I was meant to do. And I definitely don't blame being a mom for that, but I definitely think
No.
it has a lot to do with that, just that time in your life where things become a little bit blurry. Like you don't know what you're looking at, and you don't really know what to do with yourself. And I think that it's easy to look outward to try to find yourself, right? It's easy to look outward for the next best thing, or what's going to make me lose 20 pounds by tomorrow, or what, like, it's so easy to look outside. And I think what really helped me was jumping into personal development and looking inside instead, because like you mentioned, it is just mind-boggling how much we look outside and start idolizing these people that, like, celebrities and whatever. We start idolizing their lives, and like all of a sudden we're making ourselves feel worse, because those things are not
Yeah.
attainable for most of us. Those things are not even like in our grasp. So like we end up sabotaging ourselves, right? And
Oh, completely.
I don't think a single mom listening to this or not listening to this, I don't think a single mom could say that they never felt that way at some point. I know so many moms who are on that journey of finding that love, like finding what they're supposed to do, what they're meant to do, what fires them up, right? So
Right.
I think that's like so amazing. So I think that another huge part of that is it's super powerful for us to recognize this, right? And so
Mhm.
like it gives you a totally different perspective of life. Am I right? Like you
Yeah.
totally just start to see things through a completely different lens. So if you could pick like one toxic society norm that just like irritates the shit out of you, like that is just like I know there's probably a bunch, and if you
Just
have a few, that's
one.
okay.
No, I was
If you have a
kidding.
few, that's okay. But like, what is one that just irritates the absolute shit out of you?
Okay. So this is like equal parts irritation and equal parts almost just like sadness around this. And that is knowing that women feel such a massive pressure to conform to these beauty standards and to just be beautiful in general.
Like they label it, like the way that they are labeled, like the way that society is labeling beauty is just something like it's just this term. Like, what does this term mean? And it means something different to all of us, but instead of looking inward to say, what does beauty mean to me? We're like, well, KK thinks that beauty means this, right?
Mhm.
And Kiki over here thinks that beauty is this. And so we're like, oh well, Kiki and KK, man, that they think this, so like that's what it is. And it's just such bullshit. Like, why are we idolizing all of these other people for what they think it means? Why are we not doing the work to figure out what that means for us? Right? Like,
Exactly.
what else? I feel like you got like one or two
Well,
in there that you're like,
well, gosh, there's so many, but I kind of wanted to expand on that because
yeah.
I think it's not only just looking at what other people are doing, but what we have to realize is that one, historically, women have always been valued for their beauty, not for what they come to the table with, not for, their contributions or how great of a person they are. And that's so deeply ingrained in us. And it's still playing out today. So not only are we concerned with what KK and Kiki are doing and looking like, but now marketing genius with a marketing genius that is what it is, these companies are profiting off of our insecurities and they're inventing insecurities. And then they come in and say, well, yeah, you need to fix this, this, and this. Oh, but wait, I have the solution. Okay, well, that's not a coincidence. They are making billions in the process, and we are just feeling like shit. And buying these things, buying into them. And then each time we do that, then we're kind of broadcasting to other women like, yeah, this is the right way. Like this is important. So it's really difficult. And I think that's one thing I talk a lot about on the show is understanding like where I am accountable in this and also where we are victims in this
Absolutely.
whole cycle, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's great that you talk about you also being guilty of some of these things, because I think that that's real, right? You're not here trying to say like, oh, you shouldn't do this, like no, like blah blah blah. Like
No.
we're just as guilty. We are all guilty of those things. And to backtrack for a second about what you said about the company marketing. So it is definitely one of the most converting tactics in marketing is absolutely recognizing a problem that you can solve for someone, right?
Hmm.
But the problem there is that the line, like that line of like what's appropriate or what's not becomes really blurry for them, right? So
Hmm.
obviously there are obese people who may need to lose weight. That's just a fact. That's not a that's more of a like a health fact. That's not like a like, oh, you're fat. Like that's like a listen, where you're at right now, your obesity is a medical condition. You need to lose some weight. That's one thing, right? But
Hmm.
then they're taking it past that line and they're saying, well, like, oh, you're fat, I can fix that. And you're like, and now all of a sudden, even if you're not obese, even if you're maybe slightly overweight or whatever it is, now all of a sudden in your head, you have that problem, right? So
Right.
actually marketing to the people who medically might need that kind of help, you're utilizing the people who need medical help to basically put that lie into the minds of the rest of us, right? And so
Hmm.
the only thing I'll say about that though is that as humans, we're accountable for ourselves too, right? So like if that's what they're doing, and I'm not saying it's right by any means, not excusing it, but it's also up to us to build that boundary between ourselves and marketing tactics to be able to say, wow, like that's really extreme, but I'm not going to let that bother me, or that I'm going to, like I know that that's not they're not talking to me or whatever. Like it's also our responsibility to speak up about it and say like what the hell, but it's also our responsibility to not allow ourselves to take it that way, right? So it's
Oh,
like
definitely.
it's this really hard this really hard balance. But I mean, for how long has it been a terminology where, in marketing or in business, sex sells, right? How long has that been
It's true.
terminology? And
Yeah.
how effed up is that? Like how effed up? And now it's like that was maybe the term 20 years ago, and now that term, they've just taken like the word sex out of it, and now it's all this just like beauty. Now beauty is now that ugly word in that sentence because they think it sounds better, because it does
It
in a
does.
sense, right? Like it
Sounds
sounds
a lot less more innocent.
and more innocent's a good point, but that's the point. Like they're labeling it. They're choosing the label instead of us choosing a label, which is just effed up, real effed up. And I think this is huge too, because I know it affects me personally, right? You have to look in the mirror every day, and all these lies that you hear on social media and everywhere, right? These lies get
Mhm.
ingrained in your head. So I know this affects me personally. I've been doing a ton of work with personal development. I'm getting there, but we're all human, right? We're all human, and we
Yeah.
will look in the mirror one day and be like, my God, you could lose 20 pounds. And then you have to reframe it and say like, okay, we need to make our health a priority a little bit more and move on from there, right? I know a
Right.
ton of listeners are also going to vibe with this, because I feel like as women, this is just something, unfortunately, that was ingrained in us as kids, right? Like
Oh,
this
yeah.
starts so young, and it is so hard to just like get rid of that, right? So
It
let's
is.
dive even deeper. Okay, can you give me a super, super specific example of maybe a time that this affected you?
Oh, let's
Beauty, like the
see.
beauty standards.
I mean, probably motherhood's probably the best example because I know for a lot of us, our bodies change, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And when you look around, and whether you're a celebrity or whether you're just an average Joe Schmo, there's that messaging of get your body back, make sure you bounce back. There's so little focus on how you're feeling and how you're doing and how you're coping with this massive life change. And then, of course, there's so much focus on the baby, understandably.
Sure.
But the focus on the mom goes back to how does she look? Does she conform to these standards? Because we all know that society says there is one body type that's acceptable, and that's thinness, which again creates all kinds of other horrible outcomes for people that don't exist in thin bodies. And then we equate health with being thin. That's not right either. That's not accurate. But I think motherhood, accepting, I've had two kids. I had 2 C-sections, and then I nursed both my babies. So my body did change a little bit. My boobs are definitely not as perky as they used to be. And, I mean, they look different. And that was really that, my stomach, like everything, it was really kind of hard to go from, I guess, having a body that I think we all have body image issues, but
For
from
sure.
going right, but from going from a body that I was more okay with to something that I felt like, oh my God, this is so foreign. And like, I don't really like this, So
You
that
feel, and
was,
that's part of why we feel lost, right? Because we don't even recognize, because we didn't even realize how much we like labeled ourselves based on our body until your body changed. And then all of a sudden you're like, where am I? What
yes,
am I? What
aging's the
body am I
same way,
in?
right? Like you
Absolutely.
pick yourself apart in your 20s, and then you get in your 30s and you look at a picture of yourself in your 20s and you think, man, I wish I appreciated what I had. But again, that goes back to like this vilification of, aging. We're taught aging is bad. We're taught wrinkles are bad. Like aging is a privilege, actually. It really should have nothing to do with the way that we look, because really at the end of the day, that isn't important. But those aren't the messages we are told. I mean, from childhood, we all understand that beauty, especially for a woman, is a very, air quotes, important aspect of her life, right? And it's
Yeah.
really sad. It robs us of, living in the moment with our kids. How many moms have you known that have said, I really wanted to go swimming with my kids, but I didn't because I didn't feel good in a bathing suit. That is so sad. These are precious moments that will never, yeah. No, I mean, I'm
Can I
raising
just
my hand
raise my hand for
too.
a
Yeah,
second?
both of us, right? I mean, at some point or another. So it just robs you of like your experiences, your resources, your time, your money, like your mental energy. We just put way too much focus on that. And again, I mean, it infuriates me. And then it also makes me just really sad.
Absolutely. And I kind of think that, like, when going back to talking about 𝐂𝐐𝐓'𝐒, um, so I think it's also become this really sad level of beauty being tied to success, right? So if you're not this beautiful, if you're only a 5 on the beauty level, I don't even know what level we're on, but like if you're only a 5, you're not successful. If you're a
Hmm.
10, now you're successful. Now, what the actual hell does that have anything to do with being successful? Right?
Right.
Like, how is that even like, how is that even part of the scale of what makes you successful, of what makes anyone successful? And also, who the hell is anyone else to tell me how successful I am based on how I look? So the reason I bring this up is because I was talking to someone recently about their branding shoot. And so before their branding photo shoot, they came to me and they sent me a bunch of their like pictures of their outfits on their bed, and like, what do you think? What do you think? Right. And the
Hmm.
number one thing I always tell people is, number one rule is you need to feel comfortable. If you never wear glitter stilettos and a hot pink blazer, do not bring that. Do not
That's
bring
so
that, because
true.
God, and people will say, I saw this picture on your website and she's wearing a hot pink blazer with really cute shoes. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that was her. Like, is that you? Well, no, I don't really wear pink. Then why are we even having this conversation? Why? Like,
Right. And it'll come across
why?
too in your confidence, right? Like that's going to capture through a photo that
Absolutely.
you feel, not, you don't feel right in your skin trying to be someone else. But I
Absolutely.
also understand the pressure to want to think like, okay, well, yes, that is success. That is beauty. I guess let me aspire to be that. So
Well,
it's
right. And,
so
and it
messed
also
up.
kind of comes down to like, um, if you never wear that. Okay, so like I usually tell people, I want you to be comfortable. Whatever dressed up is for you, go like a half a step higher than that. Half a step meaning like maybe your makeup's a little bit more dramatic, or maybe you have fancy earrings, or maybe whatever. Don't be a completely different person. Just treat
Right.
yourself to being slightly nicer than what. So if you wear sweats every day and jeans and a cute t-shirt is what's like one step up for you, good for you. Rock that. Let's rock that. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
how are you being authentic if you are basically trying to turn yourself into someone else? Right. So
Hmm.
I'm curious from you. So like I'm a very like t-shirt and jeans kind of gal. Right. And for my branding shoot, I am a very hot pink person, obviously. Oh, I had a hot pink blazer, I had a hot pink backdrop, all of these things. And I had glitter sneakers, for God's sakes. Right. I was like, this is
That's
me.
so you though.
Right.
Yeah.
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 But when other people come in, so you did a branding shoot recently too, right?
Mhm.
How was that experience for you from a standpoint of battling those inner thoughts of like what you should be wearing versus what you want to be wearing?
Oh,
This is how I'm fresh on my brain because I had a branding session this morning. And so I'm like, now I'm really curious with those standards. And like, I know that it's a constant battle, whether no matter who you are, it's a constant battle. I want to know what that process was like for you.
it is a constant battle. And I think when you know you're going to be photographed, at least for me, if I know I'm going to show my face on social media, like if I'm going to do a reel or if I'm going to be photographed, oh my gosh, my like insecurities start coming out way more than they normally would. Right. And I think a lot of people feel that it's very
Absolutely.
vulnerable to know that you're going to be photographed.
Because
And we
they're
all know
afraid of
that,
being judged. They're
of
afraid of what people are
course.
going to think. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. And let's be honest, people really are judgmental and don't have a problem telling you that. So it's like
1000%.
your fear is totally valid, right? But I
Absolutely.
think for me, I mean, like I said, I came from the fashion world, so I love that kind of stuff. But what I do have to balance is as I've gotten older, I've really realized this, understanding I need to wear something that, like you said, feels elevated, also feels like me, but that I'm going to be comfortable in sitting, standing. Like, I don't want to have conditions around it. Like, well, I'm only going to like this dress if I'm not, in my bloated phase, or if I sit down and, whatever is coming over the top of my pants, So also, I think I'm in that age too, where it's like comfort has to be married with style. Because you're right. I mean, if I pick out like the gorgeous like bodycon dress, I may or may not feel great in that day. And that's just not something I'm like willing to do to my self-esteem anymore. Like I've been there, done that, did that to myself in my 20s. And I'm about to be 35. Like that shit ain't happening anymore. I'm done.
Good
So,
for you. Amen,
you
sister.
know.
I love that. So it's funny because I feel like that topic is sort of like an unpopular opinion topic, right? And so it's something where it's like the question being, what should you wear to a branding shoot? And the unpopular opinion that I would say is whatever the hell makes you feel comfortable. Whereas a lot of other people would say, you want to dress up, you want to look like a boss, you want to have a blazer, you don't want people thinking that you're just like some not serious about your business because you don't look like dressed to the nines, right? Now, I'm that person that's
Right.
like, yo, if you are barefoot and in sweats and on the couch on your laptop to do your job, that's what the hell I want to photograph because I want this to be authentic. I want this to be the real you. I don't want you to be, I would never, ever coach somebody to market themselves as someone they're not, because guess what?
Right.
People hire you because of you, right? So when I finally changed that mindset, when I finally did the work and the development and was finally like, you know what, this is me. If you don't like it, c'est la vie, right? My
Right.
client base has never been so fruitful. It's never been so, I don't know the right word. Like it's just never been so fulfilling because these people get me and they're like me and it is an enjoyable experience for everybody, right?
Mhm.
So unpopular opinions. Let's kind of go back to that for a second.
Let's do it.
Unpopular opinions are kind of something that is like trending on Instagram right now. I feel like I do have a couple posts in queue about it because I think it's kind of funny. But I'm also someone who is like, real talk, I said what I said. It is what it is. I don't really give a shit what you think. Right. So like,
Yes.
I love unpopular opinions. I think they're great. I think they are a powerful tool for some of us to actually get out of our own way and to be like, you know what, who gives a shit what everybody thinks? So unpopular opinions, like what is the biggest unpopular opinion you think that you have right now that like most people would disagree with?
Oh, okay. I know not people are not gonna like this, but we need to
Said what I
stop.
said. We're going to hashtag it. I
I
said
said
what
what
I
I
said.
said. I said what I said, and I can back up why I said it too. Um, we need to stop buying from Shein, the fast fashion company. And we need to stop consuming so much just overall. And I get that that's hard. I know that goes against the grain of like and the desire, right, to like buy every trend you see on TikTok and, have as many outfits as an influencer and never be photographed in the same outfit twice. Um, we're killing our planet by doing these things. So I know not everyone wants to hear that, but sorry, it is what
I'm
it is.
definitely guilty of the Shein thing. Shine, however you
She and
say it.
shine.
I am
Yes, exactly.
so guilty. And I will say that I'm guilty a lot because I Google something and then they just happen to be something that like comes up and a lot of times it's
Mhm.
cheap and you need it fast and
Right.
you know whatever, and you're like, I'm totally guilty of that. I am totally guilty of over consuming. I have my Starbucks coffee right here that I should not, that I said I wasn't going to drink anymore. Like, this is a huge problem. So like, with that problem, with that being said, how do you feel like you in your life are, you know, kind of like backing that up? Like, how are you, what's the right word? Like, I don't know why I can't think of the right word. How are you advocating for that? Like, what changes did you make in your life, or like what made you kind of feel like that change needed to be made?
So just more, I mean, I think again, one of the beautiful things about, the time that we live in now is we have a lot of access to education, right? And like you can because of the internet, you can access like whatever you want to know. So just education on the topic. I mean, fast fashion is notoriously synonymous with horrible working conditions, treating their workers horribly, paying them awfully, trafficking, all these things, terrible for the environment. So education on that, and more of that's coming to the forefront. I mean, H&M just got in really big trouble for greenwashing. So fortunately, all these things that maybe were more like fashion insider things are now becoming more like mainstream ideas that everyone can access.
What is
So
greenwashing?
greenwashing is basically when you make it sound like when a company makes it sound like what they're doing is like eco-friendly, but it's actually not. So they're basically just using buzzwords that attract the customer thinking,
Okay.
hey, I'm doing a good thing. So customers have the best intention in mind. And that's actually not what's happening behind the scenes. So
Wow.
H&M just got totally busted for doing that. They had been doing that for a while. And so for me, I've done several episodes on buying not buying fast fashion, shopping more sustainably, being more conscious about those things. I've done episodes on consumption, and then in my own life. And I do want to have a little caveat. This conversation relates a lot back to privilege and access and things like that. So I'm going to say this because we're limited on time here, but this conversation does warrant like a lot more time to really thoroughly
1000%.
like hash this out. So I don't want anyone listening to this being like, oh,
Yeah,
like
no,
there's,
totally.
but um for me in my life, I am really trying to be so much more intentional about what I buy and making sure that they are quality pieces that are going to last a long time. If I'm buying something to wear once, I'm not doing it anymore. If I'm trying to buy for a size that I'm not right now because I'm going to quote unquote fit into it later, no, because that never happens. We're not going to buy it later. It's still sitting in my closet a year
We
later
are
with a
all
tag
guilty
on.
of that.
We
We
all
are
do that.
all
All
guilty
of
of
us.
that.
Yes. So just trying to shop with like intentionality, trying to shop quality over quantity.
Yeah. To be fair, my intentions when I buy something that I might fit into, the intention is not bad, but
Totally. Oh yeah,
the realism
totally been
of
there. Yes. Usually we have good intentions, but I think we have to be realistic when like, okay, but how often do I follow through on those good intentions? And for me, it wasn't often. So I was like, okay, I just have to stop.
Oh, same. And I feel like I actually also, like, while I was in all the personal development stuff, I think I actually realized that I was sabotaging myself. I was actually making it harder for myself because I was setting this unrealistic like expectation of like, this is fitting into these jeans is going to be successful, right? Like that
Right.
all, and then all of a sudden I'm sabotaging it. Like, I'm looking at these pants and I'm like, God, I still don't fit into those. Oh, I still don't fit into those. Oh, I still don't fit into those. Not taking
Right.
into account what life has, like what chaos life is in, what health issues I have, all of these things. I'm not taking that into account. I'm just looking at those pair of jeans and I'm freaking pissed because they don't fit.
Well, you
I was
basically
like
just punished
sabotaging.
yourself. Yeah, exactly. And then you just feel worse afterward. And it's like, really? I'm like, this pair of jeans is sabotaging my self-esteem. Like, okay, maybe we should just get rid of the jeans. That's not worth, my mental state, right?
For sure. And I feel like when we were younger, I don't even know why this just came to mind, but like I feel like when we were younger, girls talked about what size they wore a lot more than they do now. Like it was like,
Oh,
oh,
yeah.
you're a size 7 jeans. Oh, well, I'm like a 15. Oh, like I'm like, and you really start to worry about what everybody thinks, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're trying to change your life to match what somebody else is doing, right? And
Yeah.
It's crazy. And change is not always a bad thing. I'm a huge actual fan of change because whatever didn't work out for you before, you can learn from that. I'm a wins
Mhm.
and lessons type of person. You don't lose, you learn something, right?
Right. Yeah. No, I love that
So
mindset.
let's switch gears for a second here.
Mhm.
I know that because we were in the pod squad together, I know that when you first launched your podcast, you had one name. And then a little bit later, you made the decision to pivot and actually change that name. Okay, so
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit more about that transition? Because I'm really curious to know a little bit more behind the scenes about that transition, but also I want to know if you were afraid or like what level of fear you had of what other people were going to say or think about you making that change so early in your podcast.
Yeah, so no, I was. Well, and I'll back up and say, so the name I had originally picked out was pretty unfiltered, and I had done a ton of research on it, like really felt like this is the name, this is it. And, trade applied to have it trademarked, all the things, then found out a couple months ago, I guess this was back in the summer, that another entity had also trademarked, applied for a trademark for it, and they had put theirs in first. So very long story short, the likelihood of them getting awarded the trademark was, that was most likely going to happen. So reluctantly, I had to change. I didn't want to change it. And I think I was a little bit nervous for two things. One, I had so much positive feedback on the first name. It was kind of hard to feel like you have to
I
like,
loved it. I was like, yes,
thank
girl,
you.
yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Sadly, I did too. So it's like feeling like you have to like follow up this act with something like even better. And because and I think people get really attached to names. Like I was attached to it, right? That's just a normal human thing. So I was definitely worried about that. And then I think just being so early on, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I had a big fear of, is this going to mess with like the trajectory and my numbers and the momentum that I've built so far. So, fortunately it ended up working out. And I totally agree with you, Jessi. I think things happen for a reason. I think you just learn from them and pick up and move on instead of just dwelling in the past. So it's been good. And I actually now feel like my name is slightly more aligned with all of the topics I covered. So I think it
Yeah.
ended up being a good thing, but I did really like my original name. So
Yeah.
it's just
And I
part of
think
it.
I think that's amazing though, because I think the universe really does work in really weird ways sometimes. And you can look back, hindsight's 2020, right? So you can
Right.
look back and you can say, like, I was so upset because I really love that name. I was all in on that name, and then I had to change it. And now here you are, and you're like, you know what? Looking back, like it was a hard time for me, but look where I am now. And like I may not be where I am now if I hadn't made that change, right?
Yeah.
So the thing that I think most listeners are going to relate to here is like the fear factor, like that fear of the unpopular opinion, that fear of what everybody thinks, because society and social media in general, like just instill this worry in us, right? Like we're so
Mhm.
worried that if we say the wrong thing or we look the wrong way, people are going to retaliate. They're going to speak ill words. They're going to start trolling us, right? And I think it's absolutely pours over into our personal lives, right? On a
Mhm.
much deeper level, even because now all of a sudden those things are instilled in your own person, like in your own mind and in how you think of yourself, right? So
Yeah.
in does this opinion, or like any others, like strongly affect your relationships with people? So like the things you choose to talk about or the things you believe and you're very open about them, like do any of those things affect your relationships with your family and friends?
That's so interesting. And I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, fortunately, I do have a very supportive family, and I am one of those people that I like to keep my friend group really like tight and close. Like I'm very selective with like who I spend my time with, and because I think that's important. I think where you put your energy is a really important thing to take into consideration. So no one has said anything to me. Um, but I also know that, for instance, with my family, I have very different political views than a lot of my family, and on both sides of my family. So it's very, I think when you do something kind of in the unpopular opinion space, you just have to kind of set expectations and know that not everyone's going to agree with you. And some people are going to voice that. And I think the biggest fear for me would be for my family and friends to maybe feel like I was going to judge them if they thought differently than me. And really, that's not the case. You are free to believe what you want to believe, my mission in this podcast is just to open up the conversation and bring these things to light. You can agree with me. You can disagree with me. If you disagree, please do it respectfully. Cause I've also had a lot of, a-holes disagreeing with, reels or things like that I put out, which is fine, but you can still treat each other like humans, right?
1000%.
And so, but that goes back to what you're saying about people being worried that they're going to be trolled. I think it's always important to set those expectations. Yes, you are going to have people that want to disagree with you. So fortunately, in my personal life, everyone has been really considerate, but I just hope that everyone knows I'm not saying these things to make people feel judged. I'm saying them because I think we need to bring light to these issues and have a discussion. Even if you do end up on the other side of it than I am, at least we're talking about this and can maybe move forward.
Absolutely. I think that's the biggest hurdle too in society, especially with social media. We're so quick to hide behind our phones and our computers and all this. And these conversations that happen virtually are so different than having an actual conversation like in person. Right.
Oh yeah.
And also when it comes to like the trolling thing, like, here's the thing. If people are trolling you, I mean, I totally agree with like people, we should be respectful, right? And it's okay to respectfully disagree with people. But guess what? If you're being trolled or if people are being like, just, they are so far on the other side of the opinion, you know what? You got the conversation going because they would not be even taking the time to write anything if what you said didn't hit a nerve. And guess what? When you hit a nerve in a conversation that's uncomfortable, you're starting the conversation and someone's going to grow out of it. Whether it's you, whether it's them, someone's going to grow out of it. But you became the bigger person in a sense because you started the conversation, right? And that's always where I've always been on that side of the spectrum of like, I get that this might be uncomfortable or that this is like an unpopular opinion, but choosing not to talk about it is only avoiding the topic and is only avoiding whatever's going to come later from it. Right. And so it's like, it's so entirely crazy. I have one follow-up question to that. Do you fear that your friends and families fear to speak up about maybe disagreeing with you? Like, do you think that some people don't even respond because they're afraid to have that conversation, like to open a conversation about it?
I haven't thought about that too much. I mean, I'm sure that's partly it, but I also think my friends and family kind of know how I am and know that I've always been the person to kind of push back on things, even from a young age. If I would hear something, I was always kind of the one that was like, really? Like, why? Or I don't think so, so, and I hope, I try. I'm not saying that I always get this done perfectly, but I do try to come from a place of like understanding and compassion when I'm saying these things and coming from more of a place of like education and touching on what you were talking about earlier, coming from a place of everything that I talk about on my show are things that I am either working out or struggling with myself. So I also try not to come off as I know it all, I get everything right, because that's not true, right? So hopefully people that know me, people that listen to the show understand that this is really coming from a place of like love and wanting this to be better for everyone instead of me trying to talk down on someone that may disagree with me.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And I know you have two kids, two cuties. I've seen them. They're really cute.
Thank you.
So for me personally, I've been thinking a lot about it lately. And just about how the world is so much different right now than it was when we grew up. And
So
it was
different.
different when we grew up from when our parents grew up, right? So this like evolution of the world, of life, of the way to live, whatever, is constantly changing. Right. And so I'm constantly worrying about how all of these things are going to affect my son's life. So my son is 5. How old are your kids again?
8 and 6. So we're pretty close. Yeah.
Okay. So like, I'm always wondering, like, I'm like sadly infatuated with trying to visualize what life is going to be like for him when he's my age, when he's, an adult and has a career and a job. And I have this like really disgusting infatuation with trying to really kind of like figure out like what that's going to be like for him. Right.
Yeah.
And, like, it's a really hard pill to swallow how fast things change at this point. So, you know, like I'm going to be 37. I'm going to be 37. Shame on me. I turned 37. And so
36
like,
at heart.
right. Like, I'm 29 and holding everybody. I'm
Yes.
still in my 20s. I'm totally still in my
Obviously.
20s. But in the last 10 years, okay, so I was a wedding photographer for 10 years. And in that 10 years, like career aside, in that 10 years, so many things changed at such a specific rate of change, right? And so like the
Mhm.
first 5 years of that, the change was slower, but the change was happening. And the second 5 years of that, the change felt like it was like
Like overnight.
like
Yeah.
it was overnight, it was abrupt, it was all of these things, right? So it's crazy. So like on that topic, how do you see this theory of unpopular opinions and that fear of speaking up and that fear of what everybody else thinks? Like how do you see that theory evolving into our children and like their generation?
So I think one thing that's so important for us to realize for ourselves, and then for those of us who have kids to teach them, is not everyone's going to like you. And that's totally okay. Right. Like, that's kind of, I think, like the core, if you can kind of understand and like really be at peace with like that core belief, I think it's going to help navigate. I think it's going to help and inform how you navigate different situations, right? Because there's kind of this confidence and this peace coming from accepting that not everyone's going to like you, right? Like, even if you do everything quote unquote right, someone's going to have a problem with it. You're going to be too much for someone. You're going to be not enough for someone else. That's just the way that it is. So I think like resiliency, trying to grow really confident, resilient kids is so important. And, I think about this obviously all the time. And this was a big push for another reason, why I started the podcast. I'm nervous about it too, to be honest. And I'm kind of 50-50. Like, I feel like a lot of our kids are growing up in a time where they have the benefit of having access to so much information. They're growing up and there's like a bigger push for like this body neutral movement and more education around like white privilege and things like this, that like these were topics we never discussed growing up, right? Even destigmatizing mental health, right? Like, that's not something we talked about in our generation. So I think there's a lot of hope. I mean, look at all the kids that are doing things for like climate change. There's a lot of hope. At the same time, kids in their adolescence, like the rate of plastic surgery for kids in their adolescence is going up, right? Kids wanting to have like filter selfie face and all these kind of like body dysmorphic, ideas are going on. So it's kind of both. It's like, I think we're going in a really good direction in one way. And then in another way, I'm really nervous with like social media and, kids being so desensitized because they're online all the time and they watch all these violent movies. And then we have all these like mass shooting. It's just, I'm 50-50. So I really hope for the best and I'm going to have like a positive spin on it. But I'm also, the realist side of me is kind of like, oh my God, we have a lot of work to do in a very short amount of time to make sure that our kids don't get derailed. Right.
For sure. And I think that we are doing our due diligence by opening these conversations, right? Like starting to talk about them, because the more we can push people who don't want to talk about these things, like they're avoiding those things, the more that we can talk about it, the more that we can all learn from it, the more that we can all grow,
Right.
and the more that we can all just kind of like, be. But when you say not everyone's going to like you, okay, like mic drop. That is seriously something I am constantly coaching, not only my son, but my marketing clients, because they're so eager. People are so eager to get to the end, like fast, right? Like they want
Mhm.
the end result, that what do you call that? That instant gratification. Everybody's
Yeah.
looking for that instant gratification, right? And so it's like they're so eager to try to reach everyone. And I'm over here like, no, stop. Like, seriously, stop doing that. You don't want to waste your time, your money, your energy on the people who are not for you, right? So same thing goes with like, you are not for everybody and everybody's not for you. And guess
Mhm.
what? That's okay. If anything, that's great, because that makes it easier for you to reach the people you're trying to reach, right? So like
Right.
even us starting these conversations, like we are speaking to a very specific type of person, and those are the people who are going to, you know, like get something out of this. Those are the people who are going to
Mhm.
follow the footsteps and continue to, you know, like Siri. That was really funny. I don't know why Siri thinks I'm
How
talking to her.
rude.
I'll say the name again. Wow. Okay. Anyway. um so I feel very strongly about that, because I feel like we waste so much time and so much energy and so much of our soul to like to
Yeah.
just like being on this, be like everybody else. Why not be me? I'm gonna be like just like everybody else, right? And so we
Right.
may not always agree, but you know, there's just the people who like me and I like them, and that's that. And the people that don't like me, well, I probably don't really like them either. And guess what? That's okay. There are
Yeah.
so many people in the world, like who the hell cares, right?
Right.
So what would you say has like drastically changed in your life when you started having those uncomfortable conversations? Like, where was there a fork in the road where you chose to go the hard way? Like, where you chose to go up the hill instead of down the hill? Like, what was that point in your life like?
I think starting this podcast was a huge kind of like fork in the road for me because again, up until this point, I had worked, in jobs that just you didn't really have to do that, right? Like you go in, you do what you need to do. Like whatever. The worst that would happen is maybe the buyer didn't, like the sample and we just redo it or whatever. Someone doesn't like your design, no big deal. And so I think starting this podcast was really kind of me stepping into like my adulthood, my womanhood, and kind of being like, okay, I have to reckon with the fact that not everyone's going to like me. And I will say that I still struggle with that, right? Especially as women, we have been conditioned all of our lives to be agreeable, to be likable, to not rock the boat. So it's very hard to kind of like undo that societal conditioning. But so I don't think there's ever going to be a time where I'm like, oh, I've arrived. Like today is the day going forward. I will always be okay with this. Cause I'm not. I'm a human. I have feelings, sometimes, yeah, I do want to be liked, I don't want people yelling at me on social media. But I think once you get to that point and then you can start making decisions based on that, like talking about things that are going to piss people off or are going to hit a nerve. There's also something really freeing about that. And then I feel like there's kind of a sense of pride and accomplishment and peace with knowing that you said something that felt really aligned and you felt like you needed to say, regardless of if anyone else liked it or not.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Like 1000% on board with that. Okay, so to wrap up, I'm sure like I'm envisioning so many people listening and like nodding their heads and being like, yes, 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 right? Like, okay, so I want to know that, I do know that a lot of these women who are nodding their heads, they also have this fear, right, of being trolled, of upsetting someone or of someone not liking them, or honestly, they're just afraid to make a change in their life, right? So I
Mhm.
know everybody is like thinking that in one way or another. If you're not thinking that, you're not being true to yourself or you're high, whatever. Like, what advice do you have for the listeners that are literally out there like, yes, I'm so afraid of this, but like what advice would you have for them?
I think one thing that's really helped me is just understanding, and maybe this is like having kids. I feel like you think about so many things differently. Like once I had kids, that changed a lot of
Preach.
things for me, right?
Yes.
Right. And like even kind of thinking about like when I go, and I don't know when that's going to be. And I know that's really morbid. I don't want to get too off on that topic, but it's kind of like when I'm 80 years old, am I going to care that someone, I don't know, that my uncle didn't like something I said politically? Probably not. Am I gonna care though that my kids had a mom that they felt like tried to make a difference? Yeah, I am gonna care about that. So I really kind of think we have to like zoom out almost and think of like, what do you really want for yourself? And go towards what that is. Again, there's kindness, like you don't have to be a jerk, but also accepting that not everyone's going to like you on this journey. You're probably going to upset some people. And honestly, that's okay. That's life. But I would rather get to the end of my time knowing that I did something that felt very aligned for me. And for like especially my kids, my husband, like the people I care like the most about, rather than trying to live my life, rather than performing my life, I'll say, for someone else,
Yeah.
and just knowing too that it's going to be a journey. I don't know that anyone ever like arrives at this endpoint of like, now I just don't care and I have the thickest skin. And that's not realistic. I think life is always kind of this like evolution in this journey. So knowing that as long as you're working towards that and just make baby steps towards it, because you're just going to feel a lot better living in alignment with yourself than you are performing for someone else.
For sure. And I'm a huge like anti-destination person. I always have been. And what's interesting about that is I feel like people do set this road and they have this destination. And what happens when they get to that destination is they're really disappointed and they're really like,
Yeah.
this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And then they start over because they were so blinded by where that destination that they wanted to go. They learned nothing along the way. They did whatever they had to do to get to that destination. And now they get there and they're completely disappointed or they're completely confused. They're like, this is not what I was expecting. And instead of just taking 10 steps back and, going back to that fork in the road and turning, they have to go all the way back to the beginning. Now I'm starting to think about Candyland, like or Monopoly, like
Oh
go
gosh,
back, do
Chutes
not
and
collect.
Ladders. Oh, the game that never ends.
Do not collect $200. You do not know. Like, I feel like that is definitely it. And for me, I feel like when I start to think about things like the end, and again, we're not going to go in a more of a direction here, but it's more for me of like, what will I regret? What will I look back and regret not doing or regret doing, right? So like, what would I go back and like want to change, or what would I go back and wish I would have done differently? And so like that is very much how I like to kind of like look back at that and say, what do I want my son to think at that point? Do I want him to think like, oh yeah, she worked a lot and we went on vacation and whatever, or does he want, or does he think that like, oh, my mom was a really creative person who really made a difference in other people's lives. She taught me everything I know. Like you think about what you want that conversation to be. If someone were to ask your kid that when you're gone, and someone was to ask your kid to describe you or their, like their life with you, what do you want them to say? Do you want them to say that you were a workaholic and that you worked all the time and that you were always with grandma because mom was always working and, whatever it is, like, do you want him to say that? If you don't, then make the changes to make that not the conversation. Right.
Right.
So I like to kind of like, I'm a very wide thinker. I'm a very like long-term thinker. I'm a very try to like think of all of the things that could go wrong. Like that's definitely how my brain works. But I really like to think about it as more of like, what would I regret going, like looking back, like hindsight. I know hindsight is 2020. So when I get to that point, when I'm 80, what is hindsight going to be like at that point?
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
so powerful. It's so powerful to get in that mindset and to really think about that in a genuine manner, not just like, oh, when I'm 80, I'm going to be old. My kid's going to have to put me in a nursing home. Like, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking deeper. I'm talking like legacy here. I'm talking like, what is it that you want people to say about your life at your funeral? What do you want them to say? What?
Yeah.
And then do those things.
100%. Yeah.
Yes. Love it. Oh, Sarah, this was amazing. Thank you so much for joining me today. Helping me open up the conversation about toxic norms, and just unpopular opinions as well, because I think that that's just something that so many people do not talk about. This has been so amazing. I love getting fresh views from, other people. I love to like try to see it through everybody's looking glass, because I think when we have differing opinions, or even when we're the same, it's really nice to see the way that people describe what they see, even if it's the same or different from you. I just really like to hear from other people about like how they see the world and how they see the issues and what they're doing about it. Right. And so you are doing the damn thing, girl. You are like out there to like make a difference. I love it. And it's hard sometimes, and I know it's lonely sometimes, but you're out there pursuing it, and whether you like it or not, you are inspiring somebody else to do the same thing, which, hello, isn't that like why we're here?
Yes, thank you.
So everybody that's listening, sometimes you are going to have to make decisions, and not everybody is going to be happy. Some people are not going to like it. That's just life. But I encourage you to make the decision that feels the most aligned for you, and don't give a shit what anybody else thinks. Okay, so Sarah, if listeners are totally vibing and they want to know more, they want to hear about your show, where can they find you, or how's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so it is on my show's called Socially Misguided, and it is on Apple Podcasts and it's on Spotify. You can also connect with me on Instagram at Socially Misguided Podcast. And I do reels on there. I've got like little sound bites from the episodes. You can connect with me and even reach out, to the guests that have been on there. And then if you click the link in bio, that also will take you directly to Apple Podcasts. So yeah, come check it out. Come leave me a message. I love
Amazing.
connecting with everyone. So yeah,
Yes. Amazing. Okay, Sarah, thank you so much for coming today. And thank you guys for listening.
thank you.